aspects. What was really massive was the psychological impact, how I looked at myself differently, how other people spoke to me or didn't speak to me or made so many assumptions, which can happen when you have a very visible disability or even a non-visible disability. People, when they find out about your disability or health condition, may make lots of assumptions about you that aren't necessarily true. And I found that out the hard way. So I eventually went back to work after about a year, back to that big city law firm in London, and things were very difficult. I lost a lot of confidence. I had a good boss, I had a bad boss, one who undermined my confidence and one who really boosted my confidence and saw my talents and skills. And that's what drove me to set up my business, Diverse Matters, and become very passionate about diversity in the legal profession. Because what I realized is that when we talk about diversity, a lot of organizations talk about different people. So Black, Asian, minority, women, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, all of those labels, which is great, but nobody was talking about disability. It was as if we were an invisible group. And even though we're the largest minority group worldwide, it includes mental health, it includes people who've got diabetes, dyslexia, autism, cancer, health conditions. 97% of conditions are actually not visible. You cannot see them. It's not just about sticks and wheelchairs. So that is quite a long answer to your question, but that's what really drove my passion to starting up this business, is to give organisations and individuals the confidence to talk about disability in the workplace. Don't know if we've lost Paolo there.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You froze for a bit.
I did. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I'd finished.
Lovely. Sorry, I think it must have been my internet connection. So, Yasmin, you've talked a little bit about your personal experience and in the law firm, and I suppose moving on, it would be good to hear from you about how is disability viewed and talked about in law firms today. What's your personal experience? What are you hearing from other people in a similar position to yourself?
Sure. So I think it's getting a lot better. The organisations I work with, they are embracing disability and understanding they need to put it on the diversity agenda, but we have a long way to go. I mean, I can tell you that law students in the UK doing the legal practice course in 2017-18, 15% of them declared themselves disabled. So it could be with a physical disability or a non-physical disability, so an invisible condition that you cannot see. 15% of those declared themselves disabled. However, when people are in organisations, the statistics show that only 2% are comfortable declaring their disability. So there's obviously a problem there, why people are not feeling comfortable saying that they have a disability, and therefore not asking for the adjustments, not knowing where to go, not knowing how to navigate the system, not bringing their whole self to work. There's a range of reasons why people may not share that they have a disability. So my job is really to bridge that gap, to give people the confidence and organisations to know how to recruit people with disabled talent, to make their websites accessible, to have more role models. And I think organisations, there's some trailblazers out there. I can think of a couple of firms that are understanding this, that they have to change the way in which they recruit people and talk about this subject and be more accessible and visible about disability. But there still is a problem. I do some work with the Law Society of England and Wales, which represents lawyers in the UK. And we teamed up with Legally Disabled, which was a big research project which looked at disability in the legal profession. So looking at paralegals, barristers, solicitors, people wanting to get into the legal profession who identify as being disabled. And we carried out surveys and focus groups, and we looked at what are the barriers, really, what are the barriers for getting in and on and up in organisations, in law firms. And they found there were problems, you know, that it was attitudinal, there was unconscious bias, some people physically couldn't get in the building, you know, if you're a wheelchair user and it's not accessible. There's so many issues, and so we have come a long way, because now we're starting to talk about disability, but still there's work to be done. So it's a mixed picture really. That's my experience.
Yeah. And so you've talked, you know, for example, some of the physical barriers, you know, even getting into a building. But what about, you know, building a more inclusive culture? How do you think law firms can do that?
Yeah. Well, I have an approach. I always say that there's an expression: diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being invited to dance. That's a well-known, in the diversity and inclusion world, we use that phrase quite a lot, because you can have a tick box exercise and think, right, we've recruited a disabled person, great, but does that person feel comfortable being themselves at work? You know, do they feel comfortable asking for an adjustment? Do they feel comfortable speaking to their manager about perhaps a fluctuating health condition, or time off work, or flexibility? They're two very different concepts. I've forgotten the question now. I've gone off on a tangent.
No, not at all. It's about building an inclusive culture.
Building an inclusive culture.
Right.
So yeah, inclusion is really about accepting the whole person, and making them feel comfortable. And it's it's a relationship between manager, line manager, colleagues, the organisation as a whole, not just HR, but and the individual themselves as well. It's about inclusion, is about embedding diversity really at every stage. So you can feel not included if you look on a website and it's not accessible. You know, if you're visually impaired or if you're hearing impaired, there's videos there and there's no subtitles, you instantly think, this place is not for me. They're very, very subtle messages that organisations can send. If there are no visible role models, you know, there's an expression: if you can see it, then you can be it. You know, if you can see someone like you and it can work with women, if you see women in leadership positions, you think, I've got something to aspire to. But if you see all men, you may think, there is nowhere for me to go. There's no career structure. I don't have a role model to show me how this is possible. The same thing is true of disability. If we don't have people talking about this issue, how they navigate barriers or issues or challenges along the way, we feel very isolated and alone. And that means that we feel not included. So there's lots of things that organisations can do, lots of messages. You know, on your website, do you talk about disability at all? About if you want to apply to a firm, do you talk about the adjustments in place? Or how do you have that conversation? We found in our research, Legally Disabled, that a lot of disabled people find this very stressful. They are trying to find organisations that are talking about the adjustments, and it's hard work. It's stressful anyway, applying for a new job or, you know, doing a CV anyway. But if you've got a disability, you need the adjustments in place. You need to understand, is that firm going to be inclusive to me from the very word go? And so if you don't have that from the outset, you instantly weed that organisation out and look elsewhere. So there's lots of things that organisations can do to send those positive messages about inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's certainly food for thought. And what you say about, you know, even the website, because very often that's people's first contact with an organisation.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very simple things like that which can make a big difference. And then what about, I mean, this is perhaps, you know, a more difficult question, but what about once you are in the workplace and you feel that you're, you know, being discriminated against? What would you say to someone who is in that position about dealing with that situation?
Yeah. Very tough, because obviously you feel you might feel it's a personal attack. It makes you lose a lot of confidence. I mean, I've certainly had experience of somebody saying something to me, and I knew it was discriminatory. At the same time, I was so newly injured, I didn't even know who I was. You know, I always say I was the first disabled person I'd met. I felt like I was making it up as I went along, because I hadn't come to terms with my own identity, my own sense of worth and value. I felt like a burden. You've got all of these feelings going on. I would say reach out to people who hopefully understand your situation. There's a lot of, I mean, the Law Society in the UK is helpful to mentor people, other people who've been in this kind of situation, and reach out to people who really understand and can empathise with the problem, to feel that you're not alone, because they will have tips for you. They will be able to help you navigate some of those issues and challenges, which, you know, are very sensitive. And I think the thing is not to be quiet about it. Is to actually reach out, because actually if you say nothing to anybody at all, it can make the matter worse, and it may impact on your mental health as well. And the problem is you start believing this stuff. You know, if you're very low in confidence, if you've had a significant life event, whatever it may be a bereavement, a divorce, anything, and people undermine your confidence, that can really spiral out of control. Same is true with an event like having a disability, acquiring a disability, having a new condition, is to reach out to others who've been in the position before you to get support. And then, you know, the next route is it may be you need to go down the legal route. But if you can trust someone in the organisation, someone in HR, a friend, a colleague, someone just to talk this through, because sometimes you need to check with people, am I going mad here? Is this okay? This behaviour? Am I on my own? It's having that conversation and having that trust with that person that you feel you can have that with.
Yeah, absolutely right. And could you give us an example of your work, you know, with law firms advising about disability-related issues? Because I think that could be quite interesting for, you know, the participants here, many of whom have their own law firms, for example. So it'd be good to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we offer a range of services. We offer training for line managers, or bespoke training for HR people, you know, so that they may be underconfident about how to recruit people with disabilities, what language to use, what the law is about. So there's training, and there's unconscious bias training as well, because a lot of it is we make assumptions and we screen out talent. We also have something called the Wheelchair Challenge, which has proved very popular in organisations, where we get senior leaders to spend a day in a wheelchair. And it gives visibility to disability. And disability isn't just about wheelchairs. In fact, wheelchair users are a very small minority. But the brilliant thing is, and Ernst & Young did this, JP Morgan, and really some blue chip companies, some big organisations have done it, which has kick-started their disability agenda. It gets people talking about disability. It's so in your face, this initiative, that it kind of makes people uncomfortable in a way, that they suddenly see a senior leader in a wheelchair and their whole perception of them changes. And with a big organisation, sometimes you don't, you know, the communication, they don't always know the wheelchair challenge is going on. So they might think that person's in a wheelchair for real. So the interesting reaction is that, you know, people are obviously shocked, but then their attitudes are very interesting as well. And the senior leaders have found that fascinating. But the point is that we then have a panel discussion afterwards about, you know, what did you notice? It's really putting people in the shoes of somebody with a disability. And we are not saying that you spend a day in a wheelchair, you're going to know everything about being disabled. Far from it. In fact, you know, being disabled or having that kind of identity, only that person can really understand. But it gives people an insight. It gives them a glimpse. It gives them a talking point. And it opens up some interesting discussions about mental health, other disabilities. And it just gets gets this stuff into the open, because people are generally quite awkward around disability. So that's a kind of initiative we've launched as well, which has proved very successful.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. Maybe one for AIJA to consider.
Yeah. It is a challenge, yeah.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, this is meant to be an interactive discussion, so I just wonder whether anyone who's online with us would like to pose any questions to Yasmin. This is a great opportunity, you know, to speak directly to someone who I personally find incredibly inspirational, who has, you know, dealt with, well, Yasmin's, you know, turned her life around and also is now a very vocal champion in the legal profession about disability. So it would be great to have input from our audience.
Yes, I would like to ask one question.
Thanks, Agata. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Yasmin, for this very, very interesting and very valuable presentation. My question is related to mental disabilities or other kinds of difficulties that people face psychologically. What would you suggest to the law firms or even to us like colleagues? How should we behave to avoid mistakes in treating people who experience this kind of problems?
Yeah, really good question. Thank you. So I'm finding that mental health and well-being, as we say, is really being taken seriously by organisations now, the mental health of their employees. And they realise that it's linked to productivity, employee engagement, retention. You know, we used to just look at physical health. Join a gym and we'll give you a gym membership with the organisation. And the two go hand in hand. It's physical and mental health. So we've got a long way to go. I think there's still a big stigma if you say you've got a mental health issue, but I think it's getting better. The culture has changed. What can organisations do? Well, I'm noticing that, again, on their websites, it's about the messaging. On their websites, they are talking about mental health and well-being a lot more, about what they are doing for people with mental health conditions and keeping people well and getting people to talk about this subject more openly so they're more comfortable. I think there's been a lot of training as well. In England, certainly, we have mental health first aiders, which are people who are not medically trained, but they've been on training where they can spot some signs of people maybe experiencing mental ill health or distress, and they're able to start those conversations with people before it gets to a point where it's a problem. And there's also mental health role models as well. So there've been, what I've seen, which has worked really successfully, is very senior people in big organisations coming out and saying, I have a mental health condition. I suffer, you know, I have bipolar, and this is how it affects me, and this is how it affects me in my job. Or I've been living with depression for years, or I have an eating disorder, which again is a mental health condition, or I have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Senior people actually normalising it. I think the best thing we can do is normalise this. And in other words, make this seem, you know, this is just life. This is a human being who has issues like we all do. And mental health is no different from any other issue that we experience. Rather than creating stigma around it, the best organisations are saying, we are taking the person, embracing the person as a human being, and that comes with all sorts of challenges that they may face. The beauty is, if a senior leader can speak so openly about it, it gives permission for other people, junior people, to feel comfortable also talking about their own issues. So I think that has gone a very long way. And I think to your question of, you know, what can we do as well, is it's okay to make mistakes. Just because I'm a disabled person does not mean I know everything about disability. I don't know everything about mental health condition. I've never experienced a mental health condition, but I'm willing to learn. And I think we're willing to learn and be open, and to get it wrong sometimes, to listen to the person as well, to make them feel empowered and understood and respected. I think that can go a long way as well. I hope that answers your question.
Anna, go ahead.
If I may, because I would like to share my experience, my personal experience from my firm, and also I think it might be also a reply to Agatha's questions as well. In my firm, you know, we have around 100 lawyers now, but when I joined my firm, it was 8 years ago. I already met my colleague who has 4-limb paralysis. He's, you know, he cannot really move. He cannot really write. He's typing on a computer, but of course it's an effort for him. But also he's disabled in speech. So, you know, you really have to listen well whatever he's trying to communicate. Although, you know, communication with him is totally possible, but you just need to adjust. So he's wonderful. He is a legal advisor. You know, he's working as we do. He's very, very, you know, good lawyer in competition. And I must say that from my perspective, but also lawyers who are joining my company, you know, seeing him working with us, and of course, you know, it's much difficult for him to work, and of course we all need to help him even, you know, eat lunch, because he really requires that help. But I think that also is a solution in, you know, changing our minds with dealing with such issues within the organization. Just to have the person like that and allowing him to work with us, because, you know, at first you're just shocked because you don't know, you know, how to help or you know what to do with it, and yes, even sometimes, as we had with him, you know, there is an issue with communication because we couldn't understand. But at some point you learn that actually it's perfectly fine, and we can work together, we can do stuff together, we can even talk at lunch, you know, because it is possible at some point when you're just, you know, accommodating to all the situations. So I think, you know, the solution could be also just to, you know, be brave and have these people within our organizations, and also allow them to work with us together. That is the best, I mean, from my perspective, that is the best solution. Also, how I see, you know, my colleagues are changing also their approach. At first they are a bit surprised, but then, you know, they get along and it goes, you know, and it goes smoothly. So I guess the best solution also to, you know, to accommodate to this unusual maybe situation from some of us, just to work together. And also it's good also, it's really excellent from my experience to engage people who have problems like that to all CSR activity, because the colleague of mine that I'm describing to you, he's you know, he's running and he's engaged in all our CSR projects, and he has an excellent view, you know, on many different issues from his own perspective. So I think, you know, from all the angles, having people with different problems, different disabilities on board is the best solution we could ever figure out, just to, you know, to help them, but also to help us to understand how it is, you know, to deal with these issues. So that would be just my comment that I wanted to share.
Thank you, Anna. Yasmin, I don't know if you want to say anything in reply to that.
Yeah, no, fantastic contribution. And I think the key is it's all about exposure to difference. And we find that, you know, once we meet people, because a lot of people haven't met probably a visibly disabled person before, or people may not talk about their disability so openly, but once we actually meet that person and demystify disability, you know, get to know the person and get more comfortable, then we think, actually they're just like us, really. Yes, there are additional challenges, but we value, what's great to hear, Anna, is that you're valuing his contribution, his different viewpoints, and that's because of his disability, because he's got a different life experience. And a lot of this stuff is, you know, and this is why we encourage at the Law Society for people to take on people with work experience with different disabilities, because they find actually that's the way they learn, to break down the stigma, to realise it's not as difficult as people think. I think people put barriers up by thinking, oh, this is going to be really hard. How are we going to do this? We're framed in the negative when it comes to disability, rather than the positive, unfortunately. So you've just proved that having a colleague with a disability, you've all learnt from him, actually, you know, this is possible, and it's just a different way of communicating and being patient maybe, and learning from him as well, and being guided by him. So thank you.
Well, thank you both, and also to Agata for the intervention. I think that brings us to the end of our 30-minute coffee. But again, I would just like to thank Yasmin very much for taking the time. I think you've inspired us all very much on this Friday morning, and you've attracted an audience from truly across the globe. We have people online from as far as Nairobi and India as well.
Oh, wow. Hello, so, everyone.
You've been reaching out to a truly international audience. Thank you for your time. I hope that we will get to meet you in person once the current circumstances permit. And in the meantime, thank you all for your active engagement and for joining us this morning. And I wish you all a lovely Friday and good weekend when it comes. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Look after yourselves.
Thank you.
See you on the other side.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.